The Solidarity Fund has issued an impact report focusing on the first 6 months of its operations. Now, the fund, which is financed by donations from corporates, private individuals, and of course payroll funding, was set up to counter the impact of COVID-19 and to bring relief to impacted communities. It has 3 priority focus areas. They are health-related issues, financing, and also humanitarian assistance to distressed homes and the changing behaviour of South Africans. And in its work with communities through a network of over 400 organisations, the fund says that food security and gender-based violence are systemic problems that have been further exacerbated by the lockdown. Solidarity Fund Chief Executive Officer Tandi Nzimande joins us now to discuss the impact report that was released yesterday. Ms. Nzimande, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you.
Let's just start by what the fund has received thus far and how much of that has been dispersed.
So we have received 3.1 billion rand from South Africans from every walk of life. We've had over 300,000 donations to date. And that really is from 5 rand to the large amounts that we have received. In terms of disbursements, we use a process of allocation where we have allocated over 2 billion already. In fact, 2.5 billion has been allocated. But in terms of actual disbursements, the disbursements follow a process of milestones in terms of how we open the cash gates, so to speak. So a project might be allocated an amount. However, there are certain things that must be fulfilled by that project prior to those amounts then being available for actual disbursement. So the allocations are well over 2.5.
Ms. Nzimande, the fund is, of course, an independent entity, and you were saying that not a single cent has been stolen. From a governance and accountability perspective, how often and by whom is the fund audited?
So the audit will happen, as in the external audit, will only happen at the end of the financial year for the fund, and we haven't had an external audit yet. However, we do have internal auditors who are helping us to make sure that we are running things well. The internal auditors are XKX Property. And the external auditors will be PwC. They've also been involved, but from a more arm's length involvement as we start to prepare for the audit, of course. The audit will be, year end is in February.
So, Ms. Nzimande, the fund yesterday said that its media and communication efforts, including the loud hailers, managed to reach around 80% of all South Africans. How exactly do you go about measuring that?
We very much rely on the people who are assisting us, who are familiar with the communications and space, and they will let us know that there's so many people who interact on this particular type of channel or who have visibility to that type of channel. And they will then tally their amounts and let us know what proportion of South Africa they've reached or who in particular they've reached. We even have a small example of a radio station at the Red Cross Hospital that targets children. So even little ones were reached in that process.
I mean, we all accept that we live in a very complex country that ranges from, sprawling squatter camps, and then you have very flashy suburbs and far-flung rural areas. And the common complaint is usually that people say that we hear about these efforts that you say are being made, but we haven't seen the assistance. And with regard to, once again, just the impact that the fund is said to have had, how have you gone about, measuring that as well?
So and it's actually hard to see, I think, the efforts of the Solidarity Fund from an individual perspective, because we work closely with organizations and with both, well, we work with organizations on the ground, we work with faith-based organizations, we work with government. And a vast majority, actually, of the first half of the fund was with respect to supporting the health response via the National Department of Health. So there was nothing that would have arrived saying Solidarity Fund in respect of healthcare workers, but the benefit would have been there. So again, it's where we are, what we are accounting for is how many pieces of PPE were actually distributed to depots and so on for on the PPE side, and of course then there's more ability to count households in the say humanitarian sides or individuals in the humanitarian side, but all of our work is done through others. So it's hard to point it necessarily to the Solidarity Fund.
And just in terms of communication and trying to effect behavioral change, now, the last time we spoke to the Solidarity Fund, there was a bit of criticism around the issue of loud hailers and how the messaging and the communication was done with communities. So talk to us about that in terms of how much was spent in that regard and how exactly that money was put to use to effect behavioral change.
Okay, so in the first part of the behavioral change campaign, largely what was being sought to do was to speak to information. So a lot of people, if you recall right at the beginning, we were all at a loss as to what was COVID and what was the impact and how are we to respond. There was significant panic, and so it was important to get the message out and get the message out in various ways. So there were radio campaigns, one of which was Sikabai COVID. So people would have heard that on the radio, but of course, because you don't only have one constituency that you're speaking to and you don't have one geography that you're speaking to, you try to make sure that you're covering not just the urban, but also the rural context. And in the rural context, we're advised by the traditional leaders that loud hailers would assist in taking out and in taking that message to the constituency in the rural areas. And so it was that loud hailers became a significant part of the campaign as well.
So the loud hailers became a significant part of the campaign. How much was spent in that regard? Because part of the problem is, and you would have seen where people have been aggrieved about the spending by government as well, where they've said, when people talk about behavioral change, who are these people who stepped in to conduct the sort of, training or whatever it is that they were meant to do to help people understand the pandemic, to understand COVID-19, and to change their behavior. So again, you needed to have gone back and assessed all of that. And how many loud hailers, for example, did you buy? How much did they cost? Why did they cost that much? Because we need to hold you to the same level of accountability as we would government, given that you are spending public funds.
Yes. Now, unfortunately, you've caught me a bit flat-footed on the actual specifics. Having joined the fund only a month back, I don't have the specifics at hand, but I will happily share those. I'll happily share.
And then you also look at the entities and who the Solidarity Fund actually contracted to do the work. And how many companies have been involved in this regard to help spread the message and intervene in trying to get people to understand the pandemic better?
So if we have a pillar head who has been running with the whole communications campaign. Whilst I can't speak to the previous campaign in significant detail, I can certainly speak to some of the thinking that we have with ongoing campaigns that we wish to have. So, for instance, we would have 80 radio stations that would be involved. So the campaign is driven by a single agency, say, and that agency obviously needs to rely on the footprint of the various media. So to the extent that there's radio, there's television, there's outdoor media that needs to be brought in. They will work with all those people to bring that in. So on the messaging side, it's often driven by just a single entity, but involving many entities that they would then interact with.
Which other entities do they then interact with, and on what basis? Because you've contracted Joe Public, and Joe Public is, of course, a big agency. They have a great reputation, but some would say if you look at their financials and you look at the impact of COVID-19, why haven't you decided as the Solidarity Fund rather to maybe split this into smaller segments and empowered more agencies, some of whom may be going through perhaps even more severe crises financially?
That would be a fair question. The criteria that we sought to apply was criteria that would make sure that the vast majority of South Africans would be reached. And in applying that criteria, we actually consulted with an association which is very familiar with advertising agencies and the like, and we brought on experts that helped to point us in the right direction in terms of the criteria that we had set out, which was really to reach the largest number of South Africans in the shortest amount of time.
Well, Ms. Nzimande, we have to leave it there for today, but thank you so much for your time. Solidarity Fund CEO Tandi Nzimande talking to us about their impact report, which was released yesterday. And of course, so much more to still talk to the Solidarity Fund about, and maybe we'll ask them to come back and have another chat with us. But for now, let's take a quick